Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Is the BBC in crisis? Are there echoes of the Jimmy Savile and Martin Bashir scandals emanating from Broadcasting House, as an unnamed but well-known presenter has been suspended following some very unpleasant allegations? Or is the BBC actually following due procedure and allowing the presumption of innocence to take precedence? It's easy to forget this fundamental principle of justice amidst a media, particularly a social media storm. However, does yet another problem for the BBC beg the bigger question? Is it something that is operationally competent? Its political impartiality is questioned. Today's sequence of events have been difficult for a once magisterial institution. Can it continue as it is? And as banks continue on their crusade against independent thinkers, creating non-people by closing and blocking bank accounts, I will table a motion to ensure free speech is protected. We'll be hearing from more people who have been caught up by this epidemic. Plus, is our Father in heaven, or is it our parent? His Grace, the Archbishop of York, consumed by the insufferable New Labour Human Resources Department newspeak, has claimed that referring to God as our Father is, quote, problematic. Despite the fact it's what we're told to do by Christ. Never mind. Next, I suppose, we expect to pray to Parent Mary. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined, as I said, by a Bolshoi panel this evening. Historian Dr. David Starkey and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicol-Turner. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Jacob. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top story this hour, a lawyer representing the young person involved in the BBC presenter scandal has told the corporation that their mother's allegations are, quote, rubbish and nothing inappropriate or unlawful happened. It comes after police said that they would work to establish if there is any evidence of a criminal offence, following reports that a presenter paid a teenager for explicit photos. The corporation announced yesterday that it had suspended the unnamed star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. A teenager has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a teacher was stabbed at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire. The secondary school was put into temporary lockdown, along with 2 neighbouring schools, following concerns that the suspect may have fled the scene. Police say they do not believe the incident was terror-related. US President Joe Biden has completed his brief tour of the UK after meetings with the Prime Minister and the King. He's now travelled to Lithuania for a 2-day NATO summit, which starts tomorrow. Mr. Biden was given a warm welcome at Windsor Castle, where he discussed climate concerns with King Charles. That followed a meeting with Rishi Sunak at Downing Street, where, despite recent tensions over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship between the two countries. More than 100,000 holidaymakers have been affected by EasyJet's summer flight cancellations. The airline has cancelled around 1,700 flights between July and September, most from Gatwick Airport. Fridays and weekends are expected to be most at risk of disruption. EasyJet says it's due to air traffic control restrictions rather than staff shortages, with 95% of passengers booked onto alternative flights. Andy Samu is stuck in Budapest because his flight was cancelled. He spoke to us earlier.
We're given a hotel, but many of the passengers were asked to sleep 2 to a room, which I've not seen before. It's quite unusual to see that. We've had further disruption this morning because some parents with their children have been given seats on different rows from their children. And we received a refreshment voucher, which is worth £2.55 in local currency. And I've tried 4 shops and none of them will take it.
And finally, a coroner has ruled that British victims of an Ethiopian Airlines crash were unlawfully killed when a Boeing 737 MAX crashed en route from Addis Ababa to Nairobi in 2019. All 157 passengers and crew died in the disaster, including humanitarian workers Samuel Pegram and sustainability campaigner Joanna Toole. Investigators found that a flying control system had malfunctioned, causing the aircraft to dive uncontrollably. Boeing was fined £1.8 billion after employees were found to have misled regulators about the system. We're on TV, online, on DAB+ radio and on TuneIn too. This is GB News. Back now to Jacob.
It was under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century AD where the Compendium of Roman Law was written, to be known as the Digest. It firmly stated, "Proof lies on him who asserts, not on him who denies," and so followed the ancient and treasured tradition of the presumption of innocence. A BBC presenter, said to be a household name, has been accused of paying thousands of pounds to a minor in exchange for illicit sexual images. Many of the details of this story remain unclear, but what is clear is that there's been relentless speculation about the alleged crime in the public discourse, especially on social media. Some wholly unconnected people have already been dragged into the hysteria. And it is so important that we resist these temptations. The presumption of innocence is fundamental to our justice system. Without it, the system falls apart. Remember, one day it could be you. Any one of us could face allegations, particularly in the social media culture that we now live in. And your one protection, your one hope, is that when you come up in court, it is for the opposition, for the prosecution to prove your guilt. You are assumed to be innocent. You are defended by that presumption and by a jury trial of your peers to make sure that the great power that the state has, the police force, the prosecutors, the making of laws, can be tempered when it comes down on the individual so that the individual is free. And a media storm can really circumvent all of that and destroy someone's life without evidence, before the facts have been established. Up until now, all we know is that BBC executives have met the Metropolitan Police, and the force is currently considering whether there is any evidence. They have not launched an official investigation yet for any crime, and the police must be allowed to do the job that they're employed to do. And it's unwise, it's tempting, but it's unwise to speculate any further. Indeed, as it happens late this afternoon, the individual in question, this is the person who in other circumstances could have been described as the victim's lawyer, has written to the BBC saying nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place between our client and the BBC personality. And the allegations reported in the Sun newspaper are, quote, rubbish. Although nothing, it seems, is for certain at the moment, it goes to show the importance of not jumping on a bandwagon and allowing the rule of law to do its job. Justinian's law rings more resonant than ever. It is our first and last line of defence. As always, I want to know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now I'm joined by GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins, live from Broadcasting House. Paul, straightforwardly, what are the facts?
Well, the facts are difficult to establish, frankly. We've got a huge vacuum here when it comes to facts, and into it feeds a lot of speculation and claim and counter-claim. So we had these original allegations made by the mother of this young person made through the Sun newspaper, and then extraordinarily at around 6 o'clock this evening we had a statement from a lawyer representing the young person who said that the mother's allegations were, and I quote, totally wrong and there was no truth to it. The lawyer said the Sun newspaper proceeded to publish their inappropriate article for the avoidance of doubt. Nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place between our client and the BBC personality, and the allegations reported in the Sun newspaper are, quote, rubbish. The statement went on to say that the mother is estranged from the young person, and the young person, this is the claim made by the lawyer, the young person only contacted the Sun on Friday to say that the story was rubbish after they found out that the story was being run, the inference being that the Sun never tried to contact the young person as a right of reply in the first place. So The BBC are announcing their annual statement tomorrow. There are going to be lots of questions for the Director General, Tim Davie. We also know that The Sun's journalism this evening under a lot of scrutiny. The Sun, by the way, I should say, they say that they reported a story about two very concerned parents who made a complaint to the BBC about the behaviour of a presenter and the welfare of their child. Their complaint was not acted upon by the BBC. We have seen evidence that supports their concerns. It's now for the BBC to properly investigate. Now, we know that The Sun hasn't published any of that evidence. All eyes will also be on The Sun's front page tomorrow morning, which we should get a preview of later this evening, to see what evidence they provide to stand up their own journalism. So The Sun and the BBC very much under the spotlight this evening.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Well, I'm now joined by the barrister Phil Taylor, who used to work at the BBC. If you were giving legal advice to the BBC at the moment, how would you be advising them to handle a scandal of this magnitude?
I think one has to be extremely cautious because what you have seen with the unveiling of this story this afternoon, bit by bit, it's a classic example of how a case is managed as it builds up. So the advice to the BBC is to play it very carefully, because you never quite know what the next unveiling will bring forth.
And I don't particularly want to defend the BBC, but I slightly feel I've got to, that it's in trouble either way, isn't it? That if it follows proper procedures and is fair to its employees, then people say, well, you're hopelessly slow and you don't take complaints seriously. If, on the other hand, it just hangs out a presenter to dry, against whom there is as yet no proper evidence, then why would anybody work for the BBC, that it be failing in its duty of care?
Absolutely. I worked for the BBC 50 years ago when it celebrated its 50th anniversary. So it was a little different as a corporation in those days. I think the important thing to bear in mind at the moment, though, is that presenter X has rights, and those rights have to be protected. I, as a barrister, would protect his rights if I was representing him as a client. And if I was representing the BBC as a client, I would remind the BBC that presenter X has rights.
And he's got very important rights in terms of employment law, in addition to privacy law and to the libel law. So if the allegations are completely untrue, the libel law protects him pretty well. If there's no criminal case to answer, the privacy law protects him very well. But the BBC has on top of this, of his employer, a third protection, which makes it even more important that the BBC handles this properly.
Oh, certainly. And of course, I don't exactly know what terms and conditions the contract would be. Today, most people have a handbook, and in that handbook are the terms and conditions upon which they're employed. And obviously, every employer is different. I think the difficulty I see with this particular case is the balance on the one hand between privacy and the rights of people like your fantastic GBNews station and all the other ones to have a right to actually express some opinion and report the news. And what we've got today is a reporting of the news as it unfolds.
Well, I have great worries about the privacy law, which isn't Parliament-made law, it's judge-made law. I thought it was a much better position when, as long as it was true, you could publish it. And it was only if it was false that you ran into difficulty with the libel laws.
I think the problem is the Human Rights Act, putting it bluntly. There has always been, in terms of academic law, the argument between expression, freedom of expression and privacy. My view is that the vast bulk of people eventually fall down on the side of freedom of expression, because otherwise it leads to a tyranny. And unfortunately, in a situation like that, if you have got the right to a family life and the right to privacy, which you should have in certain circumstances, there are compelling arguments as to why in the future the arguments for freedom of expression must supersede anything else.
And the great protection is innocent until proved guilty, and that is a bigger protection than privacy, because actually privacy doesn't work, that it leaks out one way or another anyway.
Well, of course, that is a classic example of, we have at the moment a person who has an anonymity. That anonymity, or it may be for a long, long time, I doubt it very much. These things have a habit of coming out, and therefore we have to just wait and see events as they continue. But I'm very thankful that the BBC have acted cautiously, and I know they've taken a bit of criticism, but I think they've done the right thing.
I think it's right to follow procedures in these difficult circumstances. The latest statement from the Metropolitan Police read, detectives from the Met Specialist Crime Command met representatives from the BBC on the morning of Monday the 10th of July. The meeting took place virtually. They are assessing the information discussed at the meeting, and further inquiries are taking place to establish whether there is evidence of a criminal offence being committed. There is no investigation at this time. Meanwhile, the individual in question's lawyer wrote to the BBC saying, for the avoidance of doubt, nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place between our client, and that is the son of the mother who has complained to the Sun, and the BBC personality, and the allegations reported in the Sun newspaper are rubbish. So the story is getting curiouser and curiouser. Don't forget to let me know what you think within the bounds of the libel laws and the privacy laws and so on, mailmog@gbnews.com. If they don't meet that, I'm afraid I won't be able to read them out. Coming up, we'll be staying with this story, but asking our panel the broader question, could this be the beginning of the end of the BBC? Oh, plus, is God trans? I hope that's not blasphemy. Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Jill says, the BBC are right not to name any individual as nothing is proven and truth needs to be investigated. Innocent until proven guilty. Ben, Where was Sir Cliff Richard's privacy when the BBC filmed his house raid live? Hypocrisy at its finest. And Pat's a heroine of today. I agree with everything you said. The voyeuristic approach to social media and the general media has for a long time been out of control. Trial by media is far too common. Well, we've discussed the importance of the presumption of innocence regarding the public allegations against an unnamed but supposedly well-known BBC presenter. But as this is merely the latest in a number of scandals from the public service broadcaster, perhaps it poses the question, has the BBC learned from its previous scandals and actually, for once, made the right decision? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by BBC journalist Robin Aitken. Robin, thank you for joining us. Do you think the BBC might be getting this rather tricky situation right at the moment?
Well, I'm very struck, actually, by what one of your correspondents said just then about Cliff Richards. I think that the problem for the BBC generally is that it has played its part in trial by media on numerous occasions. And I'm sure you can remember, Jacob, many of your colleagues in Parliament who have suffered because allegations, sometimes groundless, sometimes we never see the actual evidence, and careers have been ruined. And it is therefore, to see the BBC adopting a cautious approach with one of its own employees, one rather wishes they might sometimes apply the same standards when allegations are made about other people in public life.
But doesn't it have a legal obligation with one of its own employees because employment law kicks in and they can't really allow the News at 10 to be doorstepping people, or the Today programme, or whoever it is? You can't send out people from the BBC to doorstop BBC staff, can you?
No, you can't. And you're quite right, of course. The BBC does have has a duty of care towards its employees. So that is quite clear, and I agree with you on that. The point I'm making, I think, is that the BBC has been part of this media environment where people are put on trial, as it were, in the court of public opinion, and often found guilty on the basis of allegations made. Now, the BBC in this case is protecting its own employee, and I think that is right and proper that it should do so. Going back to your introduction to this, I think that these repeated scandals, which we've seen over the past few decades involving the BBC, leave a kind of institutional scar tissue, if I can put it like that. I think that repeated scandals like the Martin Bashir thing, like the Jimmy Savile thing, people don't forget these things.
And are you really saying that if only the BBC would treat everyone else as it treats its own employees, it's got it right this time, but it's got it so wrong in the past?
I think that's right. I mean, I think you're absolutely right there. I think the BBC in this case is moving forward cautiously because we don't know the circumstances, we haven't seen the evidence, and it is unfair that this person should have his reputation ruined without us having a firm basis for any assumption like that made about him.
Thank you, Robin. That's extremely helpful. Now with me is my panel, Dr. David Starkey and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Amy, do you think the BBC is getting it right this time because it's learnt its lessons, or that actually the BBC is in fundamental trouble and nobody any longer wants to pay the licence fee and it's just out of date?
I think the BBC is getting it completely right in this case because we really don't know anything at the moment. We particularly don't know the circumstances. The Sun itself, for some reason, didn't publish the name of this person. And I think that reason could be something to do with the motivations that they know are involved in this story that make this story not quite as it seems. There's more nuance to this. And I think that the idea that there could be elements such as extortion taking place is not out the question. There could be blackmail in this, and you cannot start to comment or pass judgment or out anyone until you have your facts straight, and the facts are not straight yet.
This is a very interesting point. We do seem to live in a world that does trial by media, and you're found guilty before you have any chance of having a hearing. on the other hand, you've got a privacy law that means things get gossiped about, and lots of people who have nothing to do with this story have been touched by it, and some have come out to say it's not me, but lots haven't come out, lots haven't said anything. That seems very unfair, that lots of people who aren't linked to it get
definitely
tarnished.
But I put this at the responsibility of this at the door of the Sun. I feel like the Sun newspaper couldn't resist putting this out into the public and letting the wolves just come and like the baying mob take hold, because the rumour mill's been
I've had very much baying mobs after me. And I think the point that you've been making, that a mentality which is really a vile medieval mentality, social media, this allegedly progressive force, with particularly the Twitter storm, the Twitter pylon, has now produced the atmosphere of the lynch mob. It's not simply the lynch mob, it's the burning at the stake and all the rest of it. And the thing that concerns me about all of this is we used to be a country that was famous for holding to legal procedure. Again, one of our listeners, that point, innocent till proved guilty. We have thrown this out of the window.
We've got an update from Ray Addison at our news desk.
Thanks, Jacob. And in breaking news, the parents of a young person at the centre of the BBC presenter scandal say they stand by their claims. That's according to the Sun newspaper. It comes after a lawyer representing the young person told the corporation that their mother's allegations were, quote, rubbish and nothing inappropriate or unlawful happened. Now, earlier today, detectives from the Met's Specialist Crime Command said that they will work to establish if there is any evidence of a criminal offence following reports that a presenter paid a teenager for explicit photos. Yesterday, the BBC announced that it had suspended the star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. Now, this is a developing story. We'll bring you more as we get it. But now, back to Jacob.
Thank you. The issue there is, why did the BBC do nothing for 2 months?
Can you imagine?
But sorry, can I just? Is not the issue the bizarre fact that the parents report this to the BBC and not to the police? In other words, that you put the BBC in a fundamentally false position. Yeah. It seems to me that the media is, of course, it's partly because of the BBC's own behaviour. The media has turned itself, judge, jury, prosecuting counsel and all the rest of it, and suddenly develops, as Robin was saying, suddenly develops a bad case of propriety with its own. So in the background, of course, while this may be, and I think in many ways is proper behaviour, we are, of course, playing Jimmy Savile. We're playing Martin Bashir. We're playing a history of the BBC applying completely separate...
sorry for Martin Bashir being in the same sentence as Jimmy Savile. I mean, he did something really silly.
No, we're talking about the BBC covering up. Let's just... Sorry, I am making a highly specific point.
But the
BBC has had a history of one rule for us and one rule for everybody else. So when it's convenient, the usual business, it runs with the hounds, and when the other, it...
But as well, every single person working in the media there are rumours, there are complaints made about everyone every day. The things I read about myself on the internet that would possibly be sent into the GBNews inbox. So I don't think the BBC are at fault. They were going to get to that complaint. It would be one of hundreds of complaints.
Thank you very much to my panel. Coming up, should banks push ideas as well as take your money? Plus, is God father or a parent? It makes the Trinity even more complicated.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here from the Met Office with your latest GB News weather forecast. A wet one tonight for large chunks of the country. We do have Met Office yellow warnings in place. Quite mild and quite blustery, all thanks to low pressure. It's been throwing cloud and rain in from the Atlantic for much of the day across the west. Whilst we've seen some sunny spells in the east, the cloud is now thickening. Further rain to come across southwest England and the Midlands, but the heaviest rain across Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. Also seen some downpours today across parts of of Northern Ireland. So some further disruption likely through this evening and overnight. It does turn a little drier over North Wales and Northern England. Quite a mild night, particularly in the southeast. Temperatures really holding up here, and a dull, damp, humid start to Tuesday. That rain should peter out across East Anglia and southern counties of England. And then it's a case of, yes, some sunny spells, but also plenty of showers moving through on a brisk breeze for most. But light winds in northern Scotland means we could see some slow-moving, intense, even thundery downpours here during the afternoon. Temperature-wise, again, around or maybe a touch below average for the time of year, struggling to get into the low 20s for most places. A dry, sunny start across eastern England during Wednesday, but then the showers get going again through the day. So again, it'll be a case of dodging the downpours, perhaps not as many, not as intense, but still some lively showers moving through. And again, things on the cool side in the breeze with temperatures high teens or low 20s at best.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Last week, we covered the banking crusade against GB News' very own Nigel Farage after he had his bank account closed down, which he believes to have been politically motivated. In the days following Nigel's announcement, we saw countless members of the public come forward with their own stories of bank account closure. The common denominator? Their, quote, controversial, unquote, views. Is this what modern-day banking has come to? Those who hold independent views are at risk of having financial access withdrawn and therefore losing a fundamental part of our free society. There is in front of the House of Commons the Digital Markets Bill. It's going into committee stage soon and will have report stage later in the year. I have put down, or will put down, an amendment at the report stage to ensure that banks cannot close down the accounts of customers on the basis of their political opinions. And I'm now joined by a member and senior advisor to Reform UK, Ben Habib, who also happens to be a former Brexit Party MEP. This seems to be a problem that only affects those on the right. I haven't heard of any members of the Labour Party or of the people who want to get us back into the European Union having their bank accounts closed.
It is extraordinary. You know, anyone who is proud of being British, is patriotic, believes in an independent, sovereign United Kingdom, wishes to protect our borders, wishes to deregulate, cut taxes, give betterment to the prosperity of the people of the United Kingdom, they're now regarded as right-wing, that lot that I described, which used to be the preponderance of the electorate. They're regarded as right-wing, and somehow their views are vilified, and those views are now being used as a weapon against them, and in Nigel's case, to be debanked. And it's a very serious turn of events.
But it's not even that right-wing that Ken Clarke, Lord Clarke as he now is, had his American Express card
that was extraordinary.
cancelled.
I was amazed by that.
And he is a Conservative and was a Conservative Chancellor.
But on the left of the Conservative Party.
That's right, on the left of the Conservative Party. And yet American Express sent him so many forms that he thought, well, I can't be bothered with that.
Well, I think there are two things going on here, aren't there? The first is the politically exposed person. It's not even really a regulation. I think it's advisory, isn't it, for banks?
No, it's secondary legislation.
It is secondary legislation. OK, so there's the politically exposed person stuff, and then there's the environmental, social and governance stuff going on. And in a sense, the PEP stuff is something that we can grasp more easily because it's defined. Someone who held high office or currently holds high office.
But not necessarily very high office. I mean,
any office,
Any office. Member of Parliament, member of the European Parliament, and their families and their associates.
And member of the European Parliament is about as low as it gets, frankly, in the pecking order. But I think the ESG thing, the environmental social governance, is more pernicious because under the social guidance of ESG, it's up to those who are making their own private regulations to determine what is right and what is wrong. So, for example, defence industry has often been debanked as a result of being in the defence industry.
Well, and the Bank of England put out a circular some years ago trying to discourage lending to fossil fuel companies.
And fossil fuel companies.
And we need all the fossil fuels we can get at the moment to keep prices down.
Absolutely. And, you know, we had some of our great universities turning their endowment funds, turning their back controversially on fossil fuel companies many years ago. And, of course, that withdraws investment from a crucial part of the economy. So we've got to be very careful how these things are promoted and how ESG is used. And, I mean, frankly, actually, I'd love your view on this, Jacob. Frankly, I'm staggered that ESG is given the prominence it is in a regulatory framework alongside the very basic motivations behind capitalism, which is to make profits for shareholders and to, you know, meet your creditors'
When I was
obligations.
an active fund manager, I thought ESG was in conflict with your fiduciary duty to make money for your clients. And I think as you go back through the food chain to the ultimate client, it is that it's imposed on fund managers by institutions. But the institutions represent individuals, very often pension holders or charitable givers, and they want the maximum return. They don't want to lose the opportunity for return because of the political views of their investment manager or the client of the investment manager. It seems to me.
Exactly. And so you've now got a seat at the table, if you like, that isn't monetarily profit-driven. And how can you run a truly capitalist system if you've got a socialist seat at the table? It creates these conflicts which are terribly hard to navigate.
Well, except ultimately there will be some clever fund manager who will make a lot of money by investing in things that aren't so socially glorious. And that's the way capitalism always works. But thank you, Ben. I'm joined now by former MEP Dr. Henrik Nielsen, who had his bank account closed down by Metro Bank for seemingly no reason. The common denominator strikes again. Well, thank you for joining us. Metro Bank closed your bank but wouldn't give you any reason?
No, out of the blue, I simply got a letter from Metro Bank saying that I had 60 days to move my bank account to another bank, and they hadn't talked to me about it. They hadn't said anything about it before I got the letter. I therefore wrote a pretty sharp letter saying that I really would like to have an explanation why that was, and I never even received an answer. And I have to be honest with you, at that point, we were talking January 2020, a lot of other things was happening at that time, so it sort of slipped, and I didn't follow it up with Metrobank.
And they closed down your daughter's account as well?
The main problem... No, what happened was then a couple of years later, my daughter was trying to get a mortgage, and she applied to Metrobank for a mortgage. And when they found out that I was going to be a guarantor, they completely refused her any mortgage whatsoever. And the mortgage broker we used said he had never come across that before. He was very, very surprised. But I think the thing for me here is actually that if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. I mean, I'm hardly high up on Putin's list or the genocidal Chinese government or anything like that. Nobody's going to pay me any money, that's for sure. I'm an NHS dentist, and I've been a trade union man for the British Dental Association for a long time. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And in the society that we've got now, which is more and more cashless, if people cannot get a bank account, they can't live a normal life.
Well, that's right, because in this country, unlike in France, for example, there's no right to use cash. Therefore, everybody needs a bank account. You can't buy basic services without it. And if you lose your bank account for your political views, that really closes down free speech. Did you get any indication, any feeling for which of your views so upset Metrobank?
No, none whatsoever. They did not communicate with me at all. They did not in any way indicate why I have, you know, as you said, it seems to be right-wingers, and I'm not even a right-winger, that are targeted from these things. I have never had a problem before. And it was just Metrobank that suddenly decided they did not want to know of me at all. And it was very clear in the letter they sent that they were never going to give me a bank account again at all.
Yes, I've been shown a copy of the letter, which is just completely straightforward, saying your account is closed and that's it, and you've got a deadline in which to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it came as a complete shock.
And have you been able to open bank accounts with other people, or has this left you unbanked?
No, I had another bank account at the time, and I have had no problem with that. So I have been fine. Actually, the bank account we had with Metrobank was to pay for office expenses in relation to being a member of the European Parliament. So it was European parliamentary money that went into the bank account.
Well, I very much doubt Metrobank closed your account for Eurosceptic reasons, because it didn't like money from the European Parliament. But thank you very much, Dr. Nielsen. We have asked Metrobank for comment, but answer came there none. Coming up, the Church of England has once again found itself in the centre of controversy. Could the very concept of God be problematic? Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Julian, licence payers shouldn't be having to finance such behaviour. And Morris, this great line, banks, you're in the red, you're overdrawn. Stop putting my money where your mouth is. And Richard, what I find worrying is the culture at the BBC and ITV of stardom leading to bad behaviour. When this involves youngsters, it needs to be nipped in the bud, not ignored for fear of litigation, only to be revealed years later when it's too late. Well, talking of too late, perhaps the worst legacy of the new Labour years is the wave of newspeak that came with its revolution. Tiresomely imprecise, terms like inappropriate, unacceptable and disappointing invaded our national vernacular as the country was engulfed by human resource departments. Perhaps the worst of all such terms found its way into the press over the weekend. Problematic. In this instance, it was His Grace the Archbishop of York, the Primate of England, the second in command of the Church of England, who said referring to God as our Father is, quote, problematic, unquote, owing to its gendered nature. I suppose next we'll be praying to Parent Mary. All of this was later echoed by the Trans Pride Parade, who seemed to have been paying attention to the Archbishop.
God is trans! God is trans! God is trans! God is trans!
Unfortunately, what is really problematic is the Church of England and what seems to be the influence of its newspeak department. After all, it was our Lord himself, Christ himself, who taught us to pray, Our Father. They are his very words, Luke 11:2, and he said unto them, When ye pray, say, Our Father, which art in heaven. Well, back with me is my brilliant panel, historian Dr. David Stockey and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner, who notoriously agree on the topic of gender, at least usually. Amy, I'll let you have the first go. God the Father?
Well, God may be father, maybe mother, maybe trans. God is whatever God means to you. Faith is so personal. So God, as a symbol, is not a person. So God can be pretty much anything, can't he? She, whatever.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Is it problematic for God to be God the Father?
Yes, now, clearly, because we are questioning all of these things. I mean, to put it the other way around...
Christian,
no, forgive me. We, I mean the society, the Church of England, has long ago decided that it preaches the gospel of now, not the boring old gospel of then, and the two are in rather sharp conflict, because, you and I know, and you do too, the Bible is terribly heteronormative.
Particularly the St. James's.
I think the entire text, right from the beginning, is absolutely heteronormative. Of course it is. That was the world of then. The very concept of the church as the bride of Christ. I mean, it penetrates into the heart of theology, the relationship of God the Father and God the Son, and in Catholic doctrine certainly the Virgin.
The Blessed Virgin. Yes.
There is the Holy Family, and of course there were various ways in which modernists tried to get around this, aren't there? They say, that is merely an accident of 2,000 years ago. And really, pretty much what you were saying, that a God who is transcendent, a God who is not bounded by time and space, and indeed is the foundation of time and space, can express himself in any way. So, Jacob, I think in one sense, can you imagine a God who could actually speak directly to this world of modernity that we're dealing with now? Or is it that the world of modernity has abandoned God's creation? See, that's the big question, isn't it?
Or do we just take our cues from culture now rather than scripture?
Precisely, that's what I'm saying. The gospel of now.
A reasonable point of view to take the gospel of now, to use David's term. But if you're a Christian, then surely your faith is based on Christ. And Christ said, when you pray, say, Our Father. And to say that's problematic is just idiotic.
Can I give you... just 1 second. There's a wonderful story. All right, OK.
Well, you're being a bit naughty because you're taking it a little bit out of context. So what the Archbishop of York said was, we're going to say Our Father, however, that might be problematic for a very, very small minority of you. He was just being inclusive to the congregation.
Jacob, can I give you an example?
Father can be slightly, to use a modern speak, triggering for some people.
It can be problematic if you're an atheist. It can be problematic if you're no form of Christian. But it can't be problematic if you're a Christian because your faith is based on Christ.
I don't think it's up
just
to
one second.
you,
The church has got a very long
right to tell other Christians the way they can.
The church has got a very long.
Sounds a bit authoritarian.
There's a really good story. The Church of England has got a very long history of this. When the original formulas of faith were being drawn up in the 1530s, Henry VIII decided that the 10 Commandments were inadequately expressed, so he proceeded to revise them until, in those days, archbishops knew their stuff, and Cranmer pointed out that the 10 Commandments were generally thought to be the direct word of God and therefore were unalterable. Somebody clearly needs gently to tell Stephen Cotterill that this is the case. But I'm sorry, I think the pass is sold with the Church of England. The Church of England worships the gospel of now.
But that's why they're getting it wrong. That's why the Church of England is in decline.
That's right.
It could be.
It's absolutely spot on. The Church of England is not attracting new people because it's trying to pretend that Christianity is not what it is, not what it's based on. I mean, I'm not a biblical Christian. I take church teaching as authoritative as you.
But the teaching of which church? Now, you see, this is it. The church, the magisterium, the Church of Rome. But hasn't the Church of Rome started... Just want to say,
no.
Hasn't the Church of Rome started to get things horribly wrong also? I mean, you would not accept, I think, everything that emerged from the mouth of the current pontiff.
I accept everything that comes ex cathedra on a matter of faith and morals, as established by the First Vatican Council.
Precisely.
You know what this story does remind me a little bit of, though? You know, the whole furore, because they, them, God. It's a little bit like when people say, are you going to have a female James Bond? And everyone goes bonkers, and it's more of a reaction.
I think maybe the issues... Maybe the issues are a little bigger. Maybe the issues are just a little bigger.
The reaction to the story, rather than the reality of what happened. The reality of what happened is one archbishop said an inclusive, quite kind thing to a congregation, to appeal to his congregation.
And it's been
blown up.
And he was applauded by...
He's the second most senior, and he is directly contradicting the words of Christ. And this surely matters if you are an archbishop of whatever kind.
He's doing it to make religion accessible for all, and surely that is the foundation of Christianity.
I thought Jesus was rather... Can we just go back again? Jesus was rather keen, wasn't he, on saying, I am the truth, the light and the way, that no man cometh to God but through me. I'm afraid Jesus wasn't very accommodating, as I understand it. He had highly specific criteria for both belief and for practice. The modern church finds this disagreeable, because it's filled with sloppy thinkers and it worships the gospel of now. Now, unfortunately, it also squats on a vast historical inheritance, which it is squandering. And this is absolutely typical of that process of squandering. You have people who are fundamentally inadequate to their jobs, do not understand them, do not understand their history, do not understand what they should be doing.
The Church of England that is currently withholding the same-sex marriage that can be enshrined by law, that is something that is an inadequate squat, which I think should change. I think Jesus, again, had rather clear views on the issue of marriage. Very largely elaborated by St. Paul. Jesus also has uncomfortably clear views on divorce, that let no man put asunder those who... That's why it's rendered irrelevant within the next 10 years.
But it hasn't, because the Catholic Church that are fullest...
I'm a non-believer. I'm just trying to point out that if you are supposedly a Christian, Christianity is not an easy faith. Christianity is not a faith that accommodates itself very easily to the present.
Christianity has been evolving since it began, and I think it's going to continue to evolve and hopefully survive.
It's the repository of truth. And if what Christ said to us is truth, if Christ rose from the dead and it is truth, then you can't just alter it for today. That's meaningless. It's nonsense. And you are denying Christ by trying to edit his words.
I think that's a fundamental look at something that could be more seen as the general feeling of the Holy Spirit, which is actually quite welcoming to more people and will be popular throughout the days. But I understand that people want to grip onto this because it's a bit like... Because I don't have much skin in this game, let's be honest. But if you said to me, we're going to redo the Spice Girls without Jerry Halliwell, I would be furious.
Well,
so I can relate.
That's it. We've got to go straight to the weather now, and it'll be sunny in Somerset.
Straight.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here from the Met Office with your latest GB News weather forecast. A wet one tonight for large chunks of the country. We do have Met Office yellow warnings in place. Quite mild and quite blustery, all thanks to low pressure. It's been throwing cloud and rain in from the Atlantic for much of the day across the west. Whilst we've seen some sunny spells in the east, the cloud is now thickening. Further rain to come across southwest England and the Midlands, but the heaviest rain across Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. Also seen some downpours today across parts of Northern Ireland. So some further disruption likely through this evening and overnight. It does turn a little drier over North Wales and Northern England. Quite a mild night, particularly in the southeast. Temperatures really holding up here, and a dull, damp, humid start to Tuesday. That rain should peter out across East Anglia and southern counties of England. And then it's a case of, yes, some sunny spells, but also plenty of showers moving through on a brisk breeze for most. But light winds in northern Scotland means we could see some slow-moving, intense, even thundery downpours here during the afternoon. Temperature-wise, again, around or maybe a touch below average for the time of year, struggling to get into the low 20s for most places. A dry, sunny start across eastern England during Wednesday, but then the showers get going again through the day. So again, it'll be a case of dodging the downpours, perhaps not as many, not as intense, but still some lively showers moving through. And again, things on the cool side in the breeze with temperatures high teens or low 20s at best.
That warm feeling inside,